I want to share the 6 cinematography techniques with you that we use to create these 3 15-second spots for Baileys. If you're new to the channel, my name's Scott, a director and sometimes cinematographer based in London, England. On this job, I was playing the role of cinematographer, so I thought I'd also tell you a bit about the process, the prep involved, and the rates I received for myself, as well as the kit I supplied. I was working with the talented food and drinks photographer and director Nassima Rothika, a new working relationship for me encouraged by my friends at Food Hall, a specialist production company here in London. Since I met the warm and welcoming Jason, founder and lead producer there, about a year ago on a job for Just Eat, he's really encouraged my venture into more food work as a director, but also recommended me to a number of Food Hall's directing roster as a cinematographer, which in turn has led to loads more McDonald's work, shooting the slow motion food porn for the in-store screens with the lovely Danielle Wood, and most recently, this series of Baileys with Nassima. So I got the job because of a pre-existing relationship. But this relationship only began a year ago. But then I was on the job I met Jason on because of another pre-existing relationship with the client of that job, Just Eat, who I'd had the opportunity to work with because of another pre-existing relationship with the producer on the first job I did with that client, who I'd met working on an unpaid short film many moons before with a friend I grew up with who'd asked me to do them a favour. Why share all this? To hammer home just how important relationships are. To make the point that you never know what that job might lead on to. And lastly, that unpaid work often leads to paid work. In this case, a lot of it. All thanks to that first unpaid short film. In my experience as someone who both DPs and directs, when I solely DP, I spend a lot less time in pre-production. Food Hall had asked me about my availability. Then there'd been some follow-up messages and calls about dates and some moving of those dates in my calendar a few times, then a brief shared, then an updated brief with boards. All I had to do was digest the decks, work out what was going to be needed to achieve what they wanted to do, ask what crew I had budgeted, recommend the crew I wanted on board to fill those roles, discuss kit and lighting setups with the gaffer, as well as discussing kit and moves with the grip and gimbal operator, attend a recce of the non-studio location we'd be shooting at, and lastly, prep my own kit that would be on the job. In the camera and lighting department, there was very minimal hands to make this much happen in the time allotted. Myself, cinematographer, who was also acting as my own first AC, pulling sharps. Badly, I might add. This is not my strong suit. On day 1, a grip, and on day 2, a gimbal operator. There was a gaffer and 2 sparks. We also had a DIT and playback. Outside of camera and lighting, there was of course a director, producer, production manager, production runner, first AD, prop stylist, art assistant, drinks stylist, 2 drinks assistant on the first day and just 1 on the second, a wardrobe stylist, manicurist, and a runner. 2 hand models on day 1 and the additions on day 2 of a bartender, makeup artist, and a security and parking attendant. Across both days were 5 agency members and 1 client viewing remotely. I felt both shoot days went really well. I was pleased with what we were able to achieve under the circumstances. The first day was in a studio and the second on location. The studio day started far too early for my liking because it was in West London, so I had to leave mine before 6 a.m. to ensure I arrived for my 7 a.m. call time. Highlights included great on-site catering, getting to exercise this awesome new Hollyland C1 Pro wireless headset system, and working with a really fantastic new gaffer and electric crew for the first time, who were fundamental in bringing to life the bulk of these 6 cinematography techniques. The first one being a large, soft key light. It just makes food and drink look, or for that mind anything beauty-based, look beautiful. Achieved by gaffer Will and the team by creating a book light with 3 12K tungsten lights. It doesn't need to be a book light, but it's a great approach when you've got the space. And the reason for so much power is the second technique that we'd utilise, which is key for a lot of food porn, and that's shooting at high frame rates in order to capture hyper-real slow motion. And when you shoot at higher frame rates, you need more light. Shooting largely at 175 frames per second allowed for ramping speed fun in the edit, and we even pushed it to 300 frames per second for some of the liquid macro shots. In my on-set experience, there are very broadly speaking 2 types of gaffers. Ones who you have to tell them every detail of what you want, diffusion to use, what else the scene needs, and ones who you say, this is kind of what I want. In this instance, something warm and soft to key, and then the appearance of streaks of low winter, late afternoon sun coming through the window. They then suggest what they're thinking and go off and do it. These are generally the same types of gaffers that are then standing by a monitor and making suggestions and alterations to improve the lighting all the way up until action is called. Will, the gaffer on this shoot, was very much the latter of these two types of gaffer. So if you're wondering how everything was set up for this first scene, I thought it made most sense to hear it from the horse's mouth, as I'd never even used these 12Ks before this shoot, so I had to check with Will what they were actually called.
Tungsten 12Ks, it's nice to have all the power in the world in studios, so I thought, why not? Let's just get a nice big 12K.
Still not enough power though, Will, was it?
Yeah, we ended up using 3 for one book light, which is crazy. The reason why we went for the book light is to get that ultra soft key, you know, coming from one side, like shadowless pretty much with any object on the table. Obviously you said this, just go to town with this. So I thought, why not do it all with tungsten? You rarely get the opportunity to do it because I'm always on location. You need the power for tungsten. So I thought, big studio, let's do it. T12s for the book light, soft book light, and then we had loads of little pings. Obviously with tabletop stuff, you want loads of things coming through glasses, little accents of sun hitting various objects. So everything like the sourceful and the dados were used for that, creating textures on the table.
I'm super happy with it. I'm super happy with the whole shoot. You know, if we'd had 3 days rather than 2, and if we had a bit more money and all these things, like where it could have gone to, but like I think it looks really good for what we had.
For the second setup, we started with these same first 2 techniques, a large soft key and the use of slow motion, but added 3 more. A 4x4 cuckoo, also known as a cucaloris, a piece of wood with some swirly shapes cut into it, was used to create some texture on the back wall of the set. A hair light was used to not only add this sexy little ping to the side of the glass, but to highlight and pick out the steam from the hot coffee as it was poured. There was a little bit of playing around to be able to get this light in quickly because we were running late. So the hair light needed to achieve the 2 jobs I just mentioned, but also at the same time not blow out the actress's hand too much. We discussed coming over the top of the back wall to avoid the actress's hand more, but then we were either hitting the table with it, which we didn't want, or flaring hard into the lens, which we also didn't want. So this was the lesser of 2 evil options, and let's be honest, the average viewer isn't thinking twice about the highlight on that hand. I bet most of you wouldn't have thought about it twice if I hadn't just drawn so much attention to it.
With the second setup, learning from the first setup, we went direct with the T12 through a full silk and a muslin. And then we used the third T12 through the cuckoo 4x4, and then we used the source 4 as a little steam light, which worked really nicely, actually.
But we definitely had the dados in there at some point because we were having an issue with flicker and we ended up turning everything. Oh no, it wasn't the dados that were flicking, was it? It was one of the T12s.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Next time we should work backwards from high speed. Because I was prioritizing, when they asked me about the schedule, I was thinking wide to close. But actually, we should just go high speed to not high speed.
Absolutely.
Then we added our 5th edition, which actually featured heavily in the first spot, but I don't think they used any of the manual moves in the final edit. The use of grip to create some parallax movement in the frames. In this case, we used a dolly. On one of these frames, Nick the grip is tracking in and jibbing down whilst I'm over at the monitor pulling focus, as there wasn't budget for a first AC if I wanted both a grip and a dolly on set. You can just about see the parallax in these frames, but because of the extreme slow motion, we're having to compensate with speed. And as humans, we can only move so fast, and in my case, pull sharps so accurately. For this to have had a much more obvious effect, we really needed robotic motion control, but this was out of scope for this job, unfortunately. On top of these physical moves, subtle digital pushes have also been added in post. But what about cinematography technique number 6, Scott? Well, that made an appearance on day 2, on location for our 3rd and final spot, and it's something I've talked about plenty before. The use of practical lights. After having seen the bar on the recce, with it being on street level with a public footpath we couldn't afford to close off, I pushed for the look of this bar scene to be nighttime rather than autumnal afternoon as scripted. It meant we could draw all the blackout curtains and bring in some sexy practical lights. Art department did a great job with these dimmable lamps and some small tea lights adding loads of visual interest. We also stuck 2 Asterotitan tubes behind the bar here, and 4 diffused aperture MC lights around under the bar here. Lighting wise, the overall setup looked like this. A light panel Gemini 2x1 through some diffusion for the key light, aided by an Amaran F22C as a top light, which helped us bring some focus and attention to the drink and not overlight the talent at the same time. The 4 aperture MC lights I mentioned and the 2 Astera tubes, a dado light as a hair/rim light for the glass and liquid pouring, a second dado light to pick out the grooves in the curtain, and a third dado light to pick out this plant in the background, and of course a heap of practicals. When shooting some of the higher speed moments, we were getting some flicker off of the dado lights that I couldn't manage to dial out on camera. So we swapped in 2 aperture 300Ds with Fresnels and barn doors, trying to match the look there or thereabouts. We also held in some bounce to make sure there was plenty of light on the drink when the talent were in close for this shot. Grip came back into play in this film for loads of lovely dynamic camera movement provided by the talented gimbal operator, Stefan, not Stephen, Knight. This could have run a bit smoother with a skilled first AC on set. As mentioned, I'm rubbish at focus pulling, so Stefan and I would rehearse as much as possible in between setups and while things were being reset. On this job, we shot on my Red V Raptor. We shot as fast as 300 frames per second for some of the liquid and brief ice pouring moments on that last recipe. The high frame rate capability of the Raptor makes it perfect for food and drink work, in my opinion. We also shot on my cheapest chips for cinema lenses, Mica, Mikey, full frame set. Still not entirely sure how to pronounce that. I had pushed to hire in some much more characterful Cook Speed Pancros for some crazy bokeh, but the client had made it clear they wanted clean and sharp, so that was a no. But I did sneak in a quarter Hollywood Blackmagic filter at the last minute, which gave us a bit of character, like these pings here, and just generally takes the edge off the clinical sharpness that I don't personally love in modern day imagery. I billed APA rates for this, which is 2 days at £1,388 per day as a cinematographer, and a half-day rate included for the recce day, as well as 2 hours overtime on the Friday outside of an 11-hour day, which was billed at £139 per hour, as well as having most of my own kit on the job. That includes, in addition to the camera, lenses and filters, my monitors. There were plenty of additional on-set monitors from the playback operator Nat too. My Addy cam cart, lighting, various accessories, and kit van for a buyout of $2,500. So a good payday for me. I'd also like to add that I really did 4 hours overtime over the 2 days, not just the 2 that I billed for, but it was my choice and my choice alone to turn up early before my call time on both days, partially to avoid traffic, but also to not feel rushed, make sure I was ahead of things and be there for any questions that might concern my department. I think that's probably about it for the cinematography behind these 3 spots for Bailey's with director Nassima Rothaka and Food Hall. I genuinely really enjoyed these shoots. The first day in particular left me feeling absolutely knackered. I left my house before 6 and I wasn't home until gone 10 p.m. But it was a great crew and I felt we really did the best we could have done in the circumstances. One for the DP reel for sure. To learn about how we lit these recipe films for gusto, you should watch this video next. And make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.